The tension surrounding the Raiders right now feels heavier than anything happening on the field, because beneath the surface of this 2-8 disaster is a slow, grinding collapse that has nothing to do with missed tackles or blown coverages. What's happening behind those closed doors in Las Vegas is the kind of organizational fracture that destroys franchises for half a decade, the kind of philosophical war that quietly shapes every decision, every practice, every meeting, and every snap. While fans argue about play calls and quarterback performances, the truth is that something much deeper is rotting the foundation from within. The divide isn't loud or chaotic, but it's unmistakable. It's a quiet civil war between a front office committed to a long-term rebuild and a legendary coach who refuses to coach with anything other than his own legacy in mind, a battle between the future and the present that is threatening to drag the entire franchise into a pit they may not climb out of anytime soon. Inside the building, the mood has shifted from frustration to something closer to disbelief. A season that began with cautious hope, fresh leadership, a massive budget, and a record number of draft picks has unraveled so quickly that it almost doesn't feel real anymore. The Raiders weren't supposed to be contenders, but nobody expected them to be this lifeless, this disorganized, this incapable of putting together even a modest stretch of competency. Instead of building a foundation, the team looks like it's being rebuilt and torn apart simultaneously. Executives whisper one vision, while Pete Carroll marches forward with his own. The disconnect isn't subtle. It's shaping every decision, and it's already bleeding into the product on the field. That's why the latest ESPN report hit Raider Nation like a punch to the chest. The idea of Pete Carroll being one and done once felt ridiculous. He arrived in Las Vegas with respect, with history, with the backing of ownership, with the promise that he would bring structure and toughness. But now, national insiders are echoing exactly what the most loyal fans have been worried about for weeks. Even they see the writing on the wall. They see a coach who refuses to adapt, who refuses to embrace a rebuild, and who refuses to let go of the one quarterback whose ceiling has already been reached. They see a front office trying to modernize the franchise while a 74-year-old coach plays by rules that no longer apply. This isn't speculation anymore. It's a fracture that is widening by the week. And inside the organization, that tension is no longer whispered. It's felt. The message that came in earlier this week wasn't just concerning. It was confirmation of the fears that had been building for months. Real frustration. Real disagreements. Real alarm over how Pete Carroll is steering this team. It's one thing to struggle through a tough season. It's another to lose trust between the front office and the head coach. When those relationships crack, the fallout isn't temporary. It affects scouting meetings, personnel decisions, draft plans, and free agency philosophies. And the Raiders are now approaching the most dangerous phase of that breakdown. Because this isn't just about the present. This is about what comes next. With a 2-8 record and a brutal schedule ahead, the Raiders are heading for a season where every loss helps their future far more than a meaningless win ever could. A top 3 pick could mean a franchise quarterback, an elite left tackle, or a generational defensive talent. A top 3 pick could define the next decade of Raiders football. But Pete Carroll, being who he is, refuses to coach with any thought beyond the next Sunday. He wants to win now. He wants validation now. He wants to prove that at 74 he can still turn a locker room into a contender. But that mindset doesn't work in a rebuild. It never has. And in Las Vegas, it is the exact mindset that already burned them last year when 2 meaningless wins cost them a transformative draft position. If the Raiders manage to scrape out 3 or 4 wins down the stretch, it won't be a triumph. It'll be a catastrophe that repeats history. It will push the team out of reach of the very players they desperately need. And worse, it will give Pete Carroll the illusion that everything is fine, that the plan is working, that this roster is on the right track. He already forced the organization to commit to Geno Smith when the rest of the league had moved on. He installed the most expensive offensive coordinator in football, a coordinator whose scheme has sputtered and stalled in every meaningful moment. He elevated his son into a role where the offensive line has regressed instead of improved. He built a coaching staff based on loyalty instead of compatibility. And after all of that, the record sits at 2-8 with the playoffs long gone and the locker room showing cracks that no pep talk can fix. The truth is painful, but it's obvious now. Pete Carroll's vision for the Raiders is incompatible with the direction the franchise needs to move. The franchise needs youth, patience, development, and a long-term identity. Pete wants urgency, veterans, and short-term results that don't match the reality of this roster. 4 months, those 2 philosophies lived under the same roof, pretending they could cooperate. But the illusion is crumbling. The text message from inside the building wasn't just gossip. It was confirmation that the people responsible for the next 5 years of Raiders football are watching their head coach sabotage the very foundation they're trying to build. That's why this moment, this week, this stretch of the season feels so critical. The Raiders aren't just fighting through a tough schedule. They're fighting through an identity crisis that could define the next decade. If they allow Pete Carroll to drag this team into mid-level draft purgatory, they'll be stuck in the same cycle of mediocrity that has haunted this franchise for 20 years. This organization cannot afford to sacrifice the future for a few temporary wins that serve nothing but the pride and legacy of a coach who refuses to adapt. And that's why the belief is growing louder across the fan base and even within the building itself. Pete Carroll must be one and done in Las Vegas. Not next year. Not halfway through another season. No. The Raiders cannot move forward until they cut ties with the philosophy that brought them to this point. They need a coach who believes in the rebuild. A coach who embraces youth development. A coach who understands the value of draft capital. A coach who is willing to shape the next era of Raiders football instead of clinging to the past. The decisions coming over the next few months will shape the future of this franchise more than any play call this season. And Raider Nation deserves answers, clarity, and direction, not more chaos inside the building and confusion on the field. Because this fanbase has waited too long, suffered through too much, and deserves far better than watching history repeat itself right in front of their eyes. If you want more deep breakdowns like this and want to stay updated on every major development happening inside the Raiders facility, make sure to like this video and subscribe to the channel. Do you think Pete Carroll should be one and done in Las Vegas? Should the Raiders commit fully to the rebuild? Let me know your thoughts in the comments and let's talk about what comes next for this franchise.